everybody. Welcome back to Sarah's Table. As you can see, I'm here all by myself today. My name is Sarah Moore. My pronouns are she, her. I am going to be your host today and your favorite person. And I'm going to remind you to drink some water because you are definitely dehydrated. I am also dehydrated. We're going to do it. Okay. So this week I'm doing something a little bit differently. You know, if you follow the show, normally you get on here and we are playing RPGs and we are getting stuff going. But I this week had oral surgery earlier in the week. And I just didn't have the time to teach myself a brand new system again. And schedule folk in. And so I decided that I'm just going to do a little cozy recovery corner. Back in December, I did a cozy Christmas corner where I read some Christmas stories and talked about traditions and things of that nature. And you all seem to like it. So I thought it might be fun to do something like that again, but sort of have it be more just general nerdery based. Just recently in February, end of February, I went to Disney World. And one of the things that I did while I was there was I bought myself this Myths and Fables book, which is a bunch of fables that are set in the Star Wars universe. For those of you who don't know, Star Wars is super important to me. One of the first characters that I really fell in love with was Princess Leia. I have a Star Wars tattoo. I am all caught up on all of the Star Wars shows. It's just a big thing in my life personally. And so Galaxy's Edge, going to Galaxy's Edge is super cool for me. I got to fly the Millennium Falcon. I got to be Chewbacca. I got to jump us to hyperspace. Oh, I almost cried. It's not ashamed of it at all. It was thrilling. And also a thing that I have always loved growing up and forever and ever is fairy tales. In fact, when I am doing my writing, I am always trying to add elements of fairy tales and to capture that feeling. And so when I found this book in a little shop in Galaxy's Edge, I was like, this is perfect. I am definitely gonna do this. I have to own it. This is what is happening. Okay, so I thought, wouldn't it be cool? Maybe I'll read one. Some of them are pretty long, but I think you're here with me. I feel together. Get yourself something to drink and let's hang out. Let's hang out. Okay. I'm going to start at the beginning. And interestingly enough, the very first fable that is in this book is called The Knight and the Dragon, which I think ties into what I'm going to be doing after this, which is talking about D&D. So, themes, we love it. The Knight and the Dragon. Ooh, okay. Well, this book is beautiful. The art in it is really beautiful. You can only get it at Galaxy's Edge down at Disney. And each one is written out in the language that they have down there in Galaxy's Edge as well. All the titles, I mean, obviously not everything, but then the really beautiful, sweeping fairy tale art. All right. Gather around the fireplace? This feels right. The campfire? I don't know. You decide what sort of fiery burning element there is, but there definitely is one. There once was a tribe of nomadic people on the distant, dusty planet of Tatooine, who for many months had been terrorized by a fearsome dragon. These were a simple people with simple needs, who had for generations eked out an uncomplicated existence on the harsh desert sands, trading with the other tribes for water and sustenance, salvaging the wreckage left behind by those careless few who shared their world. Those others whose lives unfolded in the noisy cities and spaceports, who tried ineffectively to hold back the sand rather than embrace its gifts. The desert folk had little cause to visit those teeming cities, however, and although they had once roamed the rolling dunes in great caravans, they had found a place to settle. They were at one with the land and knew that the desert itself would provide them with everything they might need. So it was that these sand people came to establish a village of their own, a place they might call home. For many months, the village flourished, and food and water proved bountiful as the desert offered up its gifts. The villagers, once so used to their endless migration across the sands, grew complacent and comfortable. Yet in their ignorance, they knew not that they had awoken the wrath of a great dragon, Krayt, that made its nest amongst the nearby dunes and called that domain its own. Krayt was sly, and knew that the people of the sand were in no way its equal in battle or cunning, so it devised a plan to rid itself of them. Just as the desert had provided for the villagers, it would provide too for the dragon. The people of the sand were numerous, and the dragon ever hungry. If it rationed them carefully, the villagers would sustain it for many months to come. Soon enough, it would reclaim its domain from these interlopers, once they were all inside its belly. But dragons are long-lived and lazy, and Krayt saw no need to hurry. Thus it chose to begin with the villagers' plump livestock, which they held in large corrals on the outskirts of the village. Only then, when the entire herd had been consumed, would the dragon enjoy the taste of that which it so craved: people. Thus began a campaign of nightly terror as the dragon, so large that the beat of its wings alone was enough to stir the sand into great storms that ravaged the villagers' tents, descended upon the village to snatch at the mewling beasts in their pens before hurrying away back to its sandy lair to feast. The villagers cowered at the mere sight of such a terrible beast, and in their fear, they made no move to try to prevent the dragon's attacks. On the 5th day, however, the villagers were growing desperate, for they knew that if the dragon continued, soon there would be no livestock left in the pens to feed their children. That night, 10 of the village's most trusted warriors took up their arms and went to stand guard over the pens, in the belief that together they might prove strong enough to scare the beast into fleeing, or even to slay it. As it had each night before, the dragon came with the setting suns, a vast and horrifying silhouette, stark against the reddening sky. On huge wings, it soared, sweeping low over the heads of the villagers, wheeling above them as they raised their weapons and took aim. Yet their weapons were ineffective and did not so much as scratch the beast. Far from dissuaded, it brushed the villagers aside with a flick of its wing, and once more sailed away into the night with a squealing animal for its supper. In such a way, it continued for many days, until the villagers' livestock had all been consumed, and the sand people themselves lived in fear of what the dragon Krayt might do when it returned to discover the pens empty. Krayt, though, had planned for such an eventuality, and had secretly willed that day to come, because to a dragon, there is no sweeter meal than a helpless villager. That night, the dragon returned to the village to find the livestock pens had been abandoned. With a cackle of malicious glee, it turned to the village and beat its wings until the tents were swept away in a blizzard of sand, and the people cowering beneath were revealed. For a moment, The dragon seemed to linger, and then, licking its lips, it selected a young boy, whom it plucked from his mother's arms and carried away into the night. The boy was not the last of his peers to be lost in such a fashion, for Crate soon developed quite a taste for children. The villagers took to hiding their young in pits beneath the shifting sands. But the dragon was wise and had seen such tricks before. It dug up the children like wriggling worms, one to feast upon each night. The villagers could stand for this no longer and elected a warrior from amongst their number, whom they armed with their most precious weapons, adorned with their strongest armor, and sent out into the desert to stir the dragon from its nest. This warrior carried vengeance in her heart, for she knew the dragon must pay for the lives it had stolen, and she boldly claimed that she would soon return with the beast's head as a trophy of her victory. The villagers cheered as she strode off toward the horizon, and in their hearts, for the first time in months, they carried hope for the future. That evening, the dragon did not return to the village. Cautious words of optimism were whispered around hearthstones as the villagers enjoyed their first night of peace for some time. And with the dawn, all agreed that the warrior must have been successful, and the only reason she had not yet returned was that she bore the weight of the dragon's head on her return journey. Collectively, they sighed in relief and believed that the nightmare of their plight was over. Yet, evening rolled around again, and still the warrior had not returned. Optimism once again gave way to creeping fear, and sure enough, as the sun dipped out of sight, the dragon appeared on the horizon, and the villagers realized that all they had achieved in dispatching the warrior was to save the dragon the trouble of coming to the village for the previous evening's meal. The campaign of terror began anew. So it was that, in desperation, the villagers concocted another plan. Certain that the dragon would not be dissuaded and would keep on returning until every last one of them had been gobbled up, the villagers agreed that they must find an alternative form of sustenance to offer the dragon. The next day, a small band of villagers set out across the sands to where they knew a traveling band of fellow desert folk had temporarily made their camp. It did not please the villagers to lay siege to their own kin, but the dragon had left them with little choice. So the camp was hurriedly raided and the livestock stolen. It was a small herd, but it would buy them time, so the livestock were driven back to the village and penned in the corral, ready for the dragon's return that night. True to what had gone before, the dragon came with the setting of the suns, but showed little interest in the livestock, for it had truly enjoyed the taste of people, and the livestock would never again satisfy its hunger. The villagers wailed as it plucked another of their number from the sand, for soon, like the livestock, there would be none of them left, and their plan to distract the dragon had failed. There was only one recourse left to them. If the dragon wanted people, then people they would give it. Yet they would no longer allow the dragon to take amongst their own, for they had already lost too many. Nor would they be driven from their newfound home, for the desert had accepted them, and the months before the coming of the dragon had been the happiest they had known. Thus, the raiding party that had set out the previous day did so again. Only this time, they had a different quarry in mind. It was 2 days before they returned, and they were pained by the knowledge of what those 2 days meant, that Crate would have paid 2 more visits to the village in their absence. 2 more of their people would have been lost. And yet, upon their return, they were welcomed as heroes, for they had brought with them 7 humans, captured on the outskirts of the nearest town, and marched along the winding pathways through the dunes. Most of the livestock corrals were empty, so the captives were herded into one such pen and bound, and upon the setting of the suns, one of them was chosen and tied to a stake outside the village boundary as an offering to Crate. At first, the dragon seemed unsure of the new development, perhaps suspicious of the villagers' intent, lest they meant to poison it. In truth, a thought that had not occurred to the villagers, so desperate were they to save themselves. The dragon had, however, a most delicate sense of smell, and was soon able to discern that the offering was fresh and juicy, and wriggled just as well as all the others Crate had plucked from among the villagers. The villagers were overjoyed, for the dragon had been sated and their plan had worked. For the next 3 nights, they continued in such a fashion, selecting one of the captives, putting the sacrifice out on the village boundary, and going about their business while the dragon feasted. More raiding parties were raised. Further excursions to the nearest city yielded yet more captives. A solution had been found, and the people of the sand could once more go about their lives, assured that they had settled upon a means to appease the dragon. Yet once again, the villagers had not counted on their actions, invoking the wrath of another. An old knight, who had once been regarded as a mighty hero, had made his home on the desert world, where he had long before been tasked with protecting a most particular treasure. The knight was retired from adventuring, and much like the desert people, he shunned the company of others, preferring a life of solitude and quiet contemplation while he went about his final duty. Nevertheless, the old knight was of an altruistic disposition, and upon hearing that people were being taken from the nearby town, he felt compelled to investigate. The knight soon discovered the perpetrators behind the disappearances, but the desert folk were not subtle in their capture of the sacrifices, and still stealthy from his years traversing the galaxy, followed the raiding party back to the outskirts of the desert village. There, the old knight learned the truth, that the villagers were acting in desperation to protect themselves from the dragon Krayt. Still, while he felt great sympathy for the villagers and all they had suffered, he could not allow such a thing to stand. The old knight had not seen battle for many years, and had long before discarded his armor in favor of simple robes, all the better to conceal his true identity from the many enemies who might yet seek him out on that backwater world. So it was that, upon descending from the dunes to enter the village, the old knight was derided by the villagers, who challenged him and bound him and tossed him into the pen along with the other townsfolk they had captured. For the villagers were blind to the truth and could not see that the old knight still harbored a great and terrible strength in his weary old bones. He would, they decided, serve as another sacrifice to the great dragon Krayt, despite his advanced age and tough, leathery flesh. In his wisdom, the old knight played along with the villagers' games until, penned in amongst the other captives and unobserved by the villagers, he shrugged off his bindings and set to work freeing the others from within. Soon, the townsfolk had fled the pen, hurrying off into the dunes toward their homes, and the old knight stood alone, satisfied with his work, and smiling. As the afternoon light began to wane, the villagers returned to choose a sacrifice from amongst the captives, but were infuriated to find only the knight, kneeling silently inside the pen, his eyes closed in peaceful meditation as he awaited his fate. With little choice, lest they sacrifice one of their own, the villagers dragged the old knight to the village boundary and tied him to the stake before retreating to the safety of their tents to await the coming of the dragon. Sure enough, as day finally gave way to dusk, the silhouette of the dragon, vast and ominous, appeared on the horizon. Its wings unfurled to stir rolling clouds of dust as it sped toward the village boundary. It circled once above the camp, eyeing the old knight, laughing at the sight of such a poor victim. Yet the old knight was wily, and once again slipped his bonds, for he had known the villagers would select him as their sacrifice, and as the dragon swooped low to pluck him from the sand, he stood and ignited a gleaming sword of light, which he raised above his head in warning, thus revealing his true nature to all who looked on. The dragon, duly unnerved by the sudden alteration, wheeled in the sky above the village, roaring in frustration that what it had assumed to be yet another simple sacrifice had proved to be something altogether more complicated. Krayt was an arrogant beast, and knew that, despite the villagers' trickery, for surely it was they who had concealed the unlikely warrior beneath such humble robes. One man could be no match for a beast of its size and power. Krayt knew that it would not go hungry that night. Thus began a dance of such elegance and ferocity that the villagers all emerged from their tents to observe as dragon and knight dipped and weaved. Krayt sweeping low with its whip-like tail and flashing talons, the knight ducking and leaping, the glowing blade of his sword humming through the air. He moved with a grace that belied his age, and the villagers knew at once, upon witnessing such a feat, that they had badly misjudged the man they had assumed to be a pitiful traveler from the nearby town. For an hour or more, the battle continued, and yet neither the dragon nor the knight had made a mark upon the other, so evenly matched were they in wit and skill. The old knight understood that, as well-fed and as strong as the dragon was, he could never defeat it in battle. Indeed, his display was designed to serve an altogether different purpose, for he soon began to tire, and he sensed the dragon's glee as he faltered in his feints and stumbled on the sand. Crate smelled victory and dove, and the old knight lowered his sword of light. The villagers gasped as the dragon swooped low, claws stirring the sand, jaws yawning wide to reveal a cavernous maw lined with ivory daggers. And then it stopped. The old knight had raised his hand above his head, his palm held out toward the dragon, mere centimeters from where its tapered snout hovered. The villagers held their breath. The night had grown suddenly still. The old knight's blade flickered once, then blinked out. Then the dragon exhaled gently, issuing a contented sigh before lowering itself slowly to the ground. Like a loth wolf pup before its mother, the dragon crate prostrated itself before the knight, its head coming to rest on the sand by his feet. Tentative at first, and then suddenly rapturous, the villagers began to cheer and hoot in celebration, for they saw that the old knight had cast a spell upon the dragon to quiet its mind, and in doing so, he had finally freed them from its reign of terror. But the knight himself was not so easily placated, and he silenced the villagers with a look more fearsome than even that of the dragon. With a gesture, he bade the dragon to rise to its full height, towering over him, glowering down at the assembled villagers. He took a step forward, and the dragon followed in kind, subject to his every whim, so mesmerized was it by his spell. The dragon crate is now under my thrall, and, as such, will only do my bidding. No longer shall you suffer from its nightly visits. The crowd began to cheer once more. The old knight ushered them to silence again. Yet you have wronged the people of the town, for you have taken their pain. For you have taken your pain and made it theirs. This too shall cease. For if you ever raid the settlements of others, I shall learn of it. And I shall return with this dragon, and your village shall be destroyed. At that, the dragon stirred, spreading its wings as if to underline the old knight's point. Now go in peace, and return to your families, and enjoy the gifts of the desert. Then the old knight turned his back on the people of the sand, and slowly led the dragon away into the dusty night. The villagers never saw the old knight again, or his dragon, but they remembered his warning well. Thus, unique amongst the nomadic tribes of Tatooine, the villagers never again raided the settlements of others or took captives from the cities and towns of the desert world. I hadn't read that before just now. I was discovering it with you at the same time. And I loved me some Obi-Wan, so that was very exciting when he showed up. I was like, oh man, yeah! I'm just going to keep my voice nice and simple because, you know, when you're listening to an audiobook, you don't want the person who is reading it to interject with their excitement when they discover a character that they love. So anyway, this book is beautiful. And if you make it down to Galaxy's Edge, you should check it out. It's just like pretty bound and stuff. It's just lovely. It is maybe more expensive than you would want, but no. Disney, yo. Okay. I also want to do a little bit of reading of another new book that I got much more recently. One of the things that we did prior to me going to get this most recent surgery was I stopped at a bookstore. Bookstores are my happy place. And my partner was like, let's get you something cool so that you can be you can have things to read while you are in recovery, because we don't know how your recovery is going to go. We want you to have some stuff. It's very thoughtful that way. And one of the things that I found when I was there is this book called The Druid's Call, which is a prequel to the Dungeons and Dragons movie that just came out, Honor Among Thieves. And it is about Doric, who is the tiefling druid. And she was one of my favorite characters because she is the closest to a rogue amongst them, I felt like, of the heroes. And I am, as you all know from watching the show, rogues for life, rogues forever. But also I was really excited because E.K. Johnston wrote this book, and she has written a bunch of books that are in the Star Wars universe as well. She wrote a series about Padme Amidala, and like all of the lore behind how Queen Amidala dresses and why she has body doubles, and like it centers around the friendship that Amidala has with her body doubles and her bodyguards, and how they are chosen, and like how, like, just so many things that are filled in a way that, like, to be honest, a lot of the female characters that we have to see on the screen in Star Wars, just like their background is not filled in that way. And she also wrote a book called That Inevitable Victorian Thing, which is a beautiful love story. It is queer. It is like polyamorous. It deals with people having confusion about their gender. It deals with like so many things that that are what I would consider to be very modern, although truthfully, like like the more that I read about the Victorians, like the more that I understand that they were like just wild, freaky people, which I adore. But this is like an alternate timeline Victorian England situation. And I cannot recommend this book enough. It was the first book that I read by E.K. Johnston. And as soon as I was finished with it, I was like, well, now I have to read everything she's ever written because it is amazing. And so I saw that this was written by her. And then also, like, I have two teenagers and they are not super keen on hanging out with mom and dad because they're teenagers, which is totally fine. However, the D&D movie started showing why is my brain blanking? Trailers. There were trailers out for it, and both of them separately came to me and said, "Mama, can we go see this movie?" Which just like doesn't happen. And so I was like, absolutely. We went on opening night. We went on March 31st when it came out. Even though I have pretty bad movie theater anxiety, when it's really an important movie to me for whatever reason, I find a way to figure it out and I go, and then I'm always fine. But like, anxiety is weird. But we went as a family. There wasn't a ton of other people in the theater. And I know that there is some controversy around the D&D movie. I get it. I know that they didn't credit Gary Gygax and Dave Arneson. I understand that. I think, sure, it would have been nice to have them say based on the works of or something. But when I saw this movie, I could tell that the people who wrote it love the property. It felt like my home game. It felt like every campaign that I have ever been so excited to be a part of. There was enough funny, silly bits that like would have happened at a table. And I'm not going to spoil anything because I truly think you should all just go see it with your with your table of people. But it wasn't played for jokey laughs, and there was some genuine emotion in it. And I think everybody was cast really well, and it was just fun. And like we came out of this movie, my little family of four, who have played in home campaigns before, the four of us, and like everybody was jazzed to like play a game and talk about characters and come up with the little things and be like, oh, do you remember when this happened? Wouldn't this be great? And that kind of reminds me of when I did this thing in our game, or this other game that I was a part of. And like I think that for me is what like joyful gaming is all about, right? Like you are finding these moments of joy and these moments of impact with your table of people that you allow yourself to be vulnerable with. And it's just like fun. So like go see it with people you care about. And then on your way back, do what we did and grab some milkshakes and talk about which character you see yourself in. It's not a lecture. Not a lecture. But also like it's okay for everybody to feel a little bit of joy. Please and thank you. So this is a prequel story. Which means that like if you haven't seen the movie, it's okay. I don't think it's going to spoil anything for you. But if you are like very concerned about it, you can like pause here and you can come back later after you've seen the movie and watch the rest of this episode. But I really feel like, you know, these books came out prior to like they dropped at the same time as the movie dropped. And so I don't think that it's going to be like real bad. These are all things that you know basically immediately. And it's just like extra information. It's not, yeah, we'll see. Okay, here we go. The Druid's Call by E.K. Johnston, an original prequel to Dungeons and Dragons: Honor Among Thieves. To Boyce, this is what that weird girl from Ontario was working on when she stayed in your house last summer. Can we just take a second? I really love watching or seeing like dedications like that at the beginning of a book. It's just like so damn relatable. Like, you probably see me as weird. And I'm writing weird stuff and I'm talking to myself and I'm getting mad at the characters that I'm putting on this page. Love it. I'm going to do the first chapter and then I'm going to see where we're at time-wise. In her parents' defense, they did try. They didn't do a very good job, and they definitely gave up the moment things got difficult, but they did try. And that is how the tiefling Doric survived babyhood. Chapter 1. The sharp twang of a bowstring had a way of attracting attention. Arrows could be quiet if they were fletched properly, and a well-trained ranger could move through a pile of dry leaves without making a noise. But some things were just unavoidable. If you were going to take a shot, you had to be sure your aim was true, because you might not get another chance. Doric's arrow went wide, and the herd of deer that she and her fellows had been diligently tracking split up in a panic and melted into the trees. That was better, said a chipper voice beside her. Toriath could always be counted on for encouragement, even when Doric wasn't in the mood for it. It was the foundation of their relationship, and had been since the first time the slender, dark-haired elf had laid eyes on her. Doric crashed through the brush to retrieve her arrow. She didn't even try to be quiet, and her tail thrashed at the growing shrubs in the underbrush. She looked up and saw a snowy owl perched above her. Even the owl looked judgmental. She stuck her tongue out at it, but it didn't react. "We can't eat what we don't shoot," Dork pointed out, returning to her friend's side. "There are plenty of deer," Toriath told her. "Maybe the others will have better luck." Dork wanted to tell her that it wasn't luck. It was skill. And it was a skill that she couldn't seem to master no matter how long she practiced. She knew the other hunting parties were positioned so that after she screwed up, they'd be able to take advantage of the panicking deer. Her incompetence was part of the plan, an example of how she was able to contribute. God, she hated that. "You know," Toriath continued, "no one expects you to be out here. You don't have to hunt with us. You don't even eat that much." She did sometimes eat what the hunters brought home. Perhaps if she were a more able hunter, she would feel differently. But she wasn't. And so she ate things the elves couldn't when no one was watching and held herself to minimal portions from the communal hearth. She didn't want to remind the elves that she was different too frequently. But even more than that, she didn't want to be a burden. There were deer aplenty. In fact, there were probably too many deer. The farmers and woodcutters along the forest edge killed the wolves that preyed on their livestock, thinning them out until there weren't enough to keep the deer population in check. Then the deer ate everything that was green and below shoulder height, leaving little for other forest animals. So the elves ate the deer in order to restore the balance. It was a work in progress, but it was progress all the same. The Neverwinter Wood was a strange place where seasonal norms didn't precisely apply. Something was always flowering, or fruiting, or mating, and that meant that food was rarely hard to come by. But that food always tasted like guilt to Doric, and if her demon-given stomach could handle fallen tree bark and the occasional piece of limestone, she would let it. The wood elves had taken care of her ever since she'd first come to the forest, which was a rare blessing from the reclusive forest dwellers. She was nothing like them, but she owed them a lot. The least she could do was make it easy for them. "I want to help," Doric said. "I know," Toriath said. "Maybe you just need more practice." It was kind of her. Toriath was usually kind. But Doric had already decided that this would be her last hunt if she was unsuccessful. She'd try something else, like berry picking. It had to be hard to screw up berry picking. "Whatever you're thinking, I reject it utterly," Toriath said, "and I will kill you if you leave me out here in the forest alone with all the boys." Doric laughed in spite of herself. Toriath wasn't the only girl in their age group with ranger talents, but she dragged Doric into training with her anyway. Lately, it seemed like a few of the boys were inventing reasons to spend time with Toriath, and she wasn't particularly interested in most of them. Doric definitely understood wanting to avoid attracting attention. "Fine, I'll keep practicing," Doric said. "But maybe I should talk to Liavaris about another apprenticeship or something, just in case." Toriath only rolled her eyes, and the two girls headed back down the game trail towards the elven encampment. It was a sunny day in the Neverwinter Wood, which was not uncommon, and the air was warm. Outside the forest, it was early spring, cold days broken up by warming breezes. Here, under the dappled green light of the trees, the sun wasn't particularly hot, but it could get humid quickly. The elven hunters had gone out at first light to avoid the worst of it. Now that they were focused on the deer, Toriath's gaze wandered to and fro through the trees. Doric watched her, wondering if she could learn to see the forest the way her friend did. She wanted to love the strong, tall trees and the grappling shrubs that tried to grow up from the forest floor. But she didn't feel it the way Toriath seemed to. No matter how hard she tried to forget, the forest held dark memories for her, so she could never be entirely comfortable here. She could tell if animals were healthy or if plants were hale, but her experience was hard-won. And yet Toriath breathed the forest in, always knowing exactly where she was and remembering every leaf and twig she saw. "Berries," Toriath pointed away from the game trail. She knew Doric hated to come home empty-handed. Did you bring a bag? Doric had already pulled a foraging bag out of her satchel. The girls went into the brush, and a few steps later, they were surrounded by fat, red partridge berries, dark as blood. It took them only a few minutes to fill the bag, stripping 3/4 of the berries from every plant, leaving some for the birds. They were nearly back to the trail when one of the other hunting parties caught up with them. Toriath, look! Deverell was almost staggering under the weight of the young deer he carried across his shoulders. He'd been part of their training group, and this was his first successful hunt. He was clearly thrilled. It was awesome! The deer came crashing through where we were all set up, and my shot was perfect. Doric could see he was telling the truth. There was almost no blood, and from her angle, the deer looked unmarked. Deverell was right to be proud of himself, and he was genuine enough that it wasn't obnoxious. He'd practiced his aim day and night for months now. Toriath congratulated him, and Deverell's copper skin flushed a few shades pinker. Doric, Toriath, said Deverell's mentor, a seasoned ranger named Fenjor. I'm glad we found you. I've got to get this one back to camp, but there's something strange going on southwest of here by the river. It's too quiet, and the water doesn't feel right. We didn't have time to check it out before the deer came. Could you make sure nothing is amiss? Of course, Doric said. She handed over the berries a bit reluctantly. She was going to be empty-handed after all, but there was no way she'd say no to a request from one of the elders. Oh, these are perfect, Deverell said, looking into the bag. Your berries and my deer wrapped up and roasted together all afternoon. Ugh, it's going to be delicious. I'm going to tell everyone. Fenjor rolled his eyes, but his smile was indulgent. Toriath covered her smirk by checking her quiver. Of all the clan members, Deverell was the one she liked best after Doric, though as far as Doric knew, neither of them had talked to the other about it. Ready to go? Toriath asked. Always, Doric replied. They plunged back into the forest in the direction that Fenjor and Deverell had come from. It was an easy walk through the underbrush. The way down to the river was always easier than the way home. For most of its course through the Neverwinter Wood, the river was slow and meandering, its banks gentle. Near the camp, the river was narrow and quick, with steep rocky banks that were easy enough to scramble down, but a challenge to climb. Doric would never complain. At least she wouldn't have to do it carrying a deer. Deverell seems nice, Doric said after a few moments walking in silence. Oh, he's absolutely gone on me, Toriath said. We could have collected a basket full of slugs, and he'd still be all excited at the idea that we worked together to get dinner. It's kind of cute. Doric snorted. She'd been with the elves since she was a child, but sometimes the things they did still perplexed her. You laugh, but someday someone's going to look at those pretty red curls and fall head over heels for you, Toriath said. Most of the wood elves had brown hair, though few, like Toriath, had darker shades. Doric's hair color was the least of her concerns when it came to her head. Her horns gave her away as a tiefling instantly, and just as quickly many equated her with the destructive tendencies of demons. Doric had spent almost every waking moment since the elves had taken her in, doing her best to make sure that they had no reason to think poorly of her. You're making that face again, Toriath said. I'm not sure how many times I can reject your thoughts in one day. Toriath's complete refusal to be put off by Doric's horns, tail, and general insecurity was one of her best qualities. She'd been adamant about her friendship since the girls had first met, when Doric had spent her first season with the elves. Doric had been mystified as to why Toriath had taken to her so quickly. Toriath eventually confessed that at first it had been sheer stubbornness. Her uncle had been one of the few who'd wanted Doric to leave. The more time they spent together, though, the truer Toriath's affections had become. In the near decade since, Toriath had never wavered, even when some of the others expressed distaste for Doric. They continued down to the river, which was flowing cheerily over the rocky bed. The water was clear and cold, no matter how warm the forest got. It wasn't immediately obvious why Fenjor had said the water didn't feel right, but he was much more experienced than they were. Let's go downstream, Doric said. Upstream must be fine because the water's still clear. They kept going, and Doric began to sense that something was wrong. Dark memories of the forest, the unpredictable flooding preceded by 2 quiet animals and birds pulled at the back of her mind. She didn't want to think about it, not even to do what Fenjor had asked. Being out here is giving me the creeps, Dork said. Do you think we should go back up? Toriath asked. Dork considered it. No, we'll just take a quick look and then decide what to do from there. The girls moved as quietly as they could, which for Toriath was totally silent. Dork felt like a mammoth by comparison, even though none of the animals around them seemed to notice her. They followed the riverbank around several bends, and just when Dork was mentally kicking herself for coming up empty on even a simple scouting run, they came upon what they were looking for. A huge pile of logs stood on the far side of the river. The branches had been stripped away, and all of the detritus had been swept into a giant pit that was still smoking. All around the pile were tree stumps, short and hacked off, and the brush had been thoroughly trampled. A few of the logs had been stretched across the river. The water flowed over them, but it was clear that when they were ready to transport the timber, there would be a dam. What is happening? Toriath asked. But Dork knew the signs. Humans, she hissed. These trees are probably worth a lot of money. We're still in the middle of the woods, Toriath pointed out. Why are they cutting down trees here? How are they going to get all the logs out of the forest? Dork remembered the rush of water, the endless drag and pull. If they finish the dam, the water will build up behind it, Dork said. It'll flood the area we're standing on, but when they break the dam apart, all that water will go downstream really fast. Pushing the logs all the way to the city, Toriath finished. They stared at the wood and water, envisioning the surge and all that it would sweep away. I don't like this, Toriath said. There have always been humans in the Neverwinter Wood, but not like this. The woodcutters we know wouldn't cause this kind of damage, and it's more than just the trees. This will throw off hunting patterns, and not only ours. Dork didn't like it when humans did anything, but this in particular dug under her skin. Like with hunting deer, the elves respected that some trees had to be cut. When wood was dead, or someone needed a house, or to stay warm outside the forest, they felled only the amount they needed. But this was on a devastatingly larger scale, and it seemed like it was just the beginning. We should go back, Dork said. We have to tell the others right away. They'll have a better idea of what to do, Toriath agreed with a wise nod. From across the cleared area came an angry roar. Dork and Toriath froze immediately, recognizing the sound. Elves and bears usually avoided one another in the forest, but if Toriath was right, and the logging had disrupted the bear's hunting, it might be hungry enough to try its luck on other territory and prey. Dork grabbed Toriath's shoulder, and they both dropped to the ground. The bear crashed into view. Thankfully, it was both upwind and on the other side of the river. The bear shambled around the logging stand, sniffing at piles of wood and traces of human habitation. It made its way to the water and splashed its front paws in the shallows. There should be fish, Toriath breathed so quietly in Dork's ear that she almost thought she'd imagined it. It's probably more interested in food. While Toriath deduced the reason for the bear's appetite, Dork could imagine its rage. It should be well-fed and happy. This was the Neverwinter Wood. This was a bear's paradise. Yet now its territory had been spoiled. It would have to stay and starve, or leave and fight for a new home. Very slowly, Toriath said. While it's in the water, follow me. Toriath slid through the brush, and Dork followed, choosing every step with utmost care. In spite of her very best attempt to stay quiet, she broke a stick underfoot, and the dry crack might as well have been a thunderclap. Both girls froze, and the bear looked right at them. Make yourself big, said Toriath, no longer needing to be quiet. Don't run. Stand your ground. She swiftly turned towards the bear and planted her feet shoulder-width apart with her arms outstretched. Dork meant to match her friend's movements, but caught her foot on a tangle of roots. Her ankle buckled, and Dork went down with it, down like a prey animal. Dork! Toriath strained to keep her voice calm. The bear needed only seconds to cross the river, and it stalked up to Dork with its ears laid back. A low growl rumbled in its throat. It snapped its jaws threateningly. In a panic, Dork stood up to her full height and faced the bear down. It was just over her wingspan's length away, salivating and desperate. Stop, she said, one hand held up imperiously, her legs trembling. The bear stopped. It stood up and tilted its head, sniffing the air inquisitively. They stared at each other. In that moment, the massive creature seemed to soften, its face all but pleading. "We're going to help," Dork said firmly. "We can't help if you eat us." The bear huffed, an almost petulant sound. Its sad eyes were sunken into its head from weight loss. Its fur had become dull and patchy. Dork remembered being so hungry she thought her stomach would chew right through her spine. "Stay back." Dork set her jaw. She felt her blood boil, not at the bear, but for it. The bear wouldn't be baring its teeth at them if its home hadn't been ruined. It wasn't wrong to be angry. The tranquility between tiefling and bear suddenly snapped. Fury once again filled the bear's eyes. It dropped to its front paws with a heavy thud and roared at the top of its lungs. "Dork, back away." Toria's voice tore from a whisper to a cry. "Keep your arms up and back away." The bear snapped its attention past Dork and effortlessly bolted towards Toriath. With a terrifying snarl, it swiped a dense paw at the elf. She was nimble, but not nimble enough to escape the bear's claws. The razor-sharp tips caught her skin and dragged 5 weeping red long lines across her bicep. "Stay back," Dork shouted from deep in her gut, fingers curled like talons. She stamped the ground and closed the gap to be closer to the starving bear than any self-preservation instinct would normally have allowed. Suddenly, the bear hushed. It stopped, already in motion for the final blow, and nearly stumbled straight into Toriath. It ducked its head low, and for a second that seemed entirely like fantasy, it looked afraid. The bear backed up a few steps before turning and running back into the woods from which it came. "How," Toriath panted, clamping her arm down on her wounds. "How did you do that?" "I don't know," Dork said. She didn't want to talk about it. It was new and different. Dork had spent a lot of time trying not to be new or different. "Let's get out of here. We need someone to take care of your arm right away." She tore a length of fabric from her sleeve and wrapped it tightly around Toriath's bicep. She could still feel that famished, angry roar in her ears. The girls didn't talk as they made their way back home. Dork stared at her feet as they walked, allowing her vision to lose focus. Toriath was hurt, and all because of her. Long before they reached the treetop village, they smelled roasting meat and heard the clan celebrating Deverell's first hunt. It was familiar and almost home, and somehow she'd have to tell the people who had taken pity on her what they had seen on the riverbank, what she sensed might be coming, and that she'd gotten her only close friend hurt. It's the end of chapter 1. I always love a fish out of water story. You know, what do you do when you find yourself in a place that you do not belong? How do you make yourself belong? How do you connect to the people around you in a way that makes it, correct? I don't know. I am excited to hear about more. I am interested in seeing what happens from here. I'm going to read the rest of it. Maybe not on stream. Maybe on stream. Let me know in chat if it's a thing that you are interested in me doing more often, is having more of these little chat Sarah Reed situations. But I think that my mouth is about finished for today. I'm gonna go rest it a little bit. Thank you so much for hanging out with me. Thank you to my partner, Jeff, who is also my editor, who's going to put this together and make it look real pretty. Thank you to Marcus Mays, who is the one who is hitting that go button and being our tech over at Gen Con TV. He's always wonderful. Thank you to Tanel Levitt, who always makes the cutest little chibi versions of me every week in my promo graphic. Thank you to everybody who hung out with me tonight and listened to me reading. I think I've said it before, but I do think that there's something magical about just being read to. I think that as an adult, that doesn't happen for us very often. And I am happy to be that person for all of you. So yeah, I don't know what I'm going to be playing next week. Something delightful, I'm sure. I've had a few requests for me to do like a horror game, which is just like not what I normally do, but I am interested in giving it a shot and seeing what that's like. So we will see. I also have Horseshoe Academy to finish up the arc of, and I've got a couple other games on the horizon. So come back and see me. And as always, keep making art and keep being art. We will see you next time.